वसुदेवसुतं देवं कंसचानूरमर्दनं देवकी परमानन्दं कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुम्.
Hi, and welcome to Geeta Girl. My name is Sharmila, and the Geeta Girl podcast is about how to live skillfully and be your best self by using the advice in the Bhagavad Gita. Jai Sri Krishna, Shaila.
Jai Sri Krishna, Sharmila. Really excited about this next installment in our season on boundaries. So, our last podcast, we focused on a lot of listener questions who asked very specific questions about times when they had difficulties either setting or maintaining or communicating a boundary. And we had so many questions. Thank you, all listeners, that we covered a few in our last episode, and we will be covering a few more. And when Sharmila and I were talking about these questions, we agreed that each of them could honestly be their own podcast. They're really meaty questions with a lot of information and a lot of lessons to be learned. But we will focus just on the boundary establishing parts of each of these questions. And then maybe if you listeners want, we can do a deeper dive into any of these issues, if any of them resonate with you. So, definitely keep letting us know, and we will go ahead and dive on in.
As you said, Shayla, that each of these questions honestly could be their own podcast. And as I was studying each question and doing some research, there were so many verses in the Gita for each and every one of these questions. But for the sake of being concise, I'm just going to highlight 2 to 3 verses per question that really resonated with me and I think would really help our listeners focus on what the issue is here and how to draw strength from the verses and create that boundary.
Perfect. So, our first question is, at what point do you draw a boundary with fixing situations for others, especially among family members? And how do you know what is your responsibility and what is not your responsibility? And what about other people's expectations of how you should act and what you should do? How should you consider that in your decision making? And where do you draw that boundary? This question really resonated with me, and I'm thinking will resonate with a lot of our listeners who.
Me too. Me too.
Exactly. Raise your hand high.
What do you do with other people's opinions?
What do you do with other people's opinions? And also, I think sometimes it's easier to communicate a boundary with a friend or maybe even a coworker, but in family, it becomes really challenging. You have to see these people every day, likely. You have to maintain a close relationship with them most of the time. And depending on how long you've been in this family, you probably have set expectations about what your role is. They have set expectations about what your role is. And so if you're creating a new boundary, it can be really difficult, particularly when you're dealing with managing people's expectations, which sometimes could have been really long-term expectations about what you should be doing. So what does the Gita say?
Okay, the Gita says many, many things. But like I said, we're only going to focus on a couple of verses per question. In chapter 7, verse 27 of the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says, all beings are enveloped in utter ignorance, born of their own desires and own aversions. So, what this verse is saying is that everybody, including us, we are all ignorant of somebody else's situation, and we are all influenced by what we want and what we don't want, regardless of somebody else's situation. So, other people have expectations which work for them, not necessarily expectations which work for you. So, a great thought to think to yourself when you're viewing other people's expectations is, does that person have my well-being in mind? I'll repeat that. Does that person with that expectation have my well-being in mind.
What I'm hearing is that maybe they don't mean ill will towards you, right? Maybe they're
No,
not malintention, but the idea is they're just working from their own perspective. They're just speaking to what they need and what they want, and not really taking what you need and what you want into consideration. And as you said in this verse, we're all doing some level of that. So we can't really expect people to know what our perspective is. And that's why it's important to communicate that, because everybody is working from a position of self-interest to some point, and that's
of course.
fine.
That's the way the world works.
That's right.
And the sooner we know it, the better, honestly.
That's right.
So if the answer to that question is yes, they do have your well-being in mind, then listen to their thoughts, listen to their opinions, and consider it. If the answer is no, that they are absolutely not considering your well-being, then you got to let that go. You've just got to let it go. Their expectations, their opinions belong to them, not you. The thing to focus on is, what is my responsibility given this situation, and also given my role in this situation? When doing your dharma, it's very important to consider what your role is within the family, what your capabilities are in the family, what other people's capabilities are, and what your responsibility really is. I'll give you an example. If your mother is asking you to correct the behavior of your sibling on her behalf, and this happens so much. Oh, will you speak to your younger sibling? Will you speak to your older sibling? They'll listen to you. You can speak to them as a sibling to a sibling, but you cannot speak to them and take over that parental role. According to the family constellations theory, it's very important in a family that everyone stays in their position. If you step out of your role and then play the parent role, it then will aggravate somebody else and you'll feel resentful because you're stepping out of your role. It's really not your place.
And that same concept is reflected in the Gita, right? When Krishna basically tells us to stay in our own lane, like do your own dharma,
Right.
and don't do another person's duty or dharma. Like that's the equivalent of sort of staying in your lane. What we're saying here is that you have to decide what your responsibility is without thinking of what other people's expectations of you are. So you have to kind of divorce yourself from like, what does everybody think that I should do? What does this person think I should do? You just do what you're supposed to do. Because honestly, if you polled everybody in that family constellation around you, they might all have different expectations of what they think you should do. And then what? Right? So you do what you have to do based on what is your role in the family, what is your responsibility from what your ability is, and your expectation of yourself.
In chapter 3, verse 35, Lord Krishna says, better is one's own duty than the duty of another. The duty of another is fraught with fear. And what that means is, and I can sense it from this person's question, when they're trying to do somebody else's duty, it makes you fearful. It makes you resentful because it's not your role. In this example, let's say you're trying to talk to your sibling as if you're a parent. It'll make them resentful that, who are you to talk to me like that?
That's right. So in this example, what would you suggest you say to the mother or your parent who's telling you to talk to your sibling?
Well, that's a great question. Chapter 2, verse 31, Lord Krishna says, focusing on your duty, you should not waver. So a great approach is to tell your parent, I know this is an issue. I may or may not speak to my sibling, but I'm going to speak to them as an equal, not as a parent. I'm going to speak to them based on my opinion and what I see, because that's my duty. And honestly, if you see something else and if your concern is something else, that is your duty to fix that. but I don't see it that way. Krishna says, very important, focus on your duty, don't waver.
Right. And you can be supportive of your parent in talking to your sibling. Maybe you can give them suggestions or be helpful or point them to resources that would help them better communicate with your sibling. So no one's telling you not to be helpful, but you don't have to take on the role of parent.
Correct, in this example. But on a broader sense, overall to this question, chapter 3, verse 26, Lord Krishna says, do not unsettle the mind of ignorant people. Instead, set a good example and perform your duty. So understand that the other family members who have their opinions and expectations, they don't have to agree with you. Their inner thoughts and their inner world belongs to them and not you. And they don't have to agree with you. And that's when having a strong self-healing practice, whether it's meditation, exercise, a strong sense of self, is really important to withstand other people's expectations when other people have expectations all the time about what they think you should do because it's very convenient for them, because it means they don't have to do it.
And I think part of your expectation of yourself should also maybe be it's okay for you to be uncomfortable. Because when you're renegotiating a boundary or stating your boundary with a family member who has a different expectation of you, like even when I think of it, my stomach clenches a little bit. I think of putting myself in this kind of situation of conflict. Like it feels easier to just kind of like do what the person tells you to do, even if it makes you uncomfortable or upset. But the truth is, you might as well be uncomfortable and upset standing up for yourself rather than doing something that you feel uncomfortable and upset doing and you don't feel is ultimately your responsibility. So state your boundary to that person, maybe feel a little uncomfortable about it. Just stay firm and being uncomfortable and stating your boundary. And then honestly, that person will start learning moving forward that this is your boundary and you feel very comfortable, or at least outwardly comfortable, stating it.
Shirley, you talked about your stomach clenching. My stomach's clenching just even thinking about my family members who are going to listen to this podcast and think I've gone completely AWOL.
What do you mean you're not going to let me tell you what to do? I know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How dare you? Been decades.
Exactly. That's the thing. You have to sometimes go against expectations that people have had for you for years, and that's okay.
It's totally okay. It's all in the process of evolving ourselves and
right.
growing stronger. And you know what's beautiful about this is that you're also giving the other family members an opportunity to do their dharma and fix the situation for themselves.
That's right. And maintaining your relationship in this one example with your sibling. You're not making that a more difficult situation for yourself either. So lots of positives.
Yep. In the long term, you're really doing them a favor so that they can do their best to address a situation and create some good karma for themselves. So, listener, I hope that helps you and gives you some strength to do what you need to do. Okay, next question.
All right. So this next one, wow, this is a good one. When dealing with someone who triggers you and is imposing on you, and I'm going to pause a moment so all of our listeners can just conjure up that person. You know who it is. That person triggers you. They ask too much of you. You know who that person is. All right.
Yeah, and they ask too much of you in a nasty, entitled tone as well.
Exactly. So think about that person. And now the question is, how do you draw a boundary with compassion and with calm? Because we know you know how to state yourself with anger and frustration. That we all have down pat. But how do you do it?
All these four-letter words.
That's right.
All these four-letter words are running through my head right now. Potty mouth central, right in my brain right now.
Exactly. But nope, zip it. How do you do it with compassion and with calm?
Such a great question. Compassion starts with self-compassion. It's very difficult to feel calm with somebody else if you don't first have compassion and calm with yourself. So when this person is triggering you and imposing on you, instead of thinking, "Bubbity, bubbity, bubbity,
Fill in the blank there.
you think, okay, this person is imposing on me. This is an opportunity for me to practice compassion and calm. This is an opportunity for me to rise above my triggers, take a deep breath, and not lose my SH1T and be proud of myself at the end of this interaction. So that's the first thing to think. I'm going to have self compassion here as a kindness to myself. I am not going to go into overwhelm. So you take a deep breath and you think, right now, right here, it's not about that person. I'm going to be kind to myself. I'm going to take 2 deep breaths, 3 deep breaths. I'm not going to lose my SH1T.
And what I really like about this is so true, because when you do lose it, more often than not, you feel pretty badly about yourself afterwards. And if you dealt with it in a more compassionate and calm way, to your point exactly, it's a chance for you to experience some self growth, which we're always talking about, evolving, but also for you to walk away from there feeling good about yourself. What a nice concept to like walk away and say, I stood up for myself and I did it in a way that I feel good about the way I behaved and feel good about the relationship with this person, which is always better when you can treat them with compassion and calm.
Shayla, I like that phrase. I feel good about the way I behaved. Another great thought to have is that right now, this person is imposing on you, but you are drawing a boundary for your own mental and physical safety and well being. So, if you're doing this, you're going to draw a boundary for your own mental and physical safety and well being. It's really important to protect yourself also on another level by staying calm. I'm also not going to get overwhelmed. I'm not going to get triggered here because I'm going to draw the boundary for my own mental and physical safety and well being. I'm going to do it with calm, also for my own mental and physical safety and well being.
That's right.
That's a great attitude to have that, wait a second, my calm, my well being, my health is first in my mind right now, not that person. And how dare they say this? What an outrageous thing. What were they thinking? No, this is about me. Okay, how am I going to handle this? How am I going to be kind to myself in this moment? And there's a higher chance that that person will accept your boundary and listen if you're not triggered and shouting. A great verse in the Gita to think about is chapter 13, verse 28, where Lord Krishna says, seeing the same Lord dwelling equally in all, he's saying, I, Krishna, the universe, the life energy, the life principle essence that we all have within us. He says, the same Lord dwells equally in all. And if you have that in mind, when you have any interaction with anyone, no matter how triggering, he says, if you see the Lord dwelling equally in all, you do not destroy the divinity within yourself, and you do not diminish or destroy the divinity in somebody else. And that's what we do, right? So many times we get triggered and then we diminish ourselves, we diminish the other person.
Right.
And so, how do you have compassion for that person and compassion for yourself? The optimal attitude is there's the same divine in you and the same divine in me. And what's good for the safety and benefit of my soul is also good for the safety and benefit of your soul. So you're saying something which I'm finding outrageous and I'm getting triggered. But what's good for us is for me to draw the boundary in a calm way so that I protect my soul and my divinity and my mental and physical safety and well being. And by doing so in this way, it's also good for you and I don't diminish your soul in any way, shape, or form.
You know, I think about this one quite a bit, this concept of like seeing the divine in other people, because I think it's such an important one, mainly because I think how much this world would change if we saw the divine in others. So this is something to practice. Like people who frustrate you, even if they frustrate you from afar, like a political figure or something, try seeing the divine in them. It's really hard, but I think it's just like a muscle that you almost have to like work on
Mm,
and
mm.
practice. Like people who behave negatively that you see through the media or something, just try to exercise that muscle of seeing the divine in them and what that kind of feels like. Try that on, and it'll become easier in this interaction with somebody that you actually have a relationship with to see the divine in them, even at a time when they're frustrating you the most. And I think it'll become a little bit easier. Just a tip to make this process easier for you, practicing this before you're actually in the situation with a person makes it easier.
Yeah, I love that idea, Shayla, that it's a muscle that we need to practice, no different than building up our stamina going to the gym, no different than building up our stamina when we walk or when we run. Yeah, build up your stamina of seeing the divine in others. It becomes easier to act with compassion and calm in all situations, especially when your boundaries are being pushed, because that's very triggering. I like this idea of practicing seeing the divine in everyone. Okay, next question.
All right. So this one is for all my people pleasers out there, and I include myself in this group. I feel I cannot turn anyone down. I feel it is my duty to do what people ask of me, and this takes time away from my family to please others. So I think this person is talking about helping others and overlooking what are some of their other priorities or responsibilities.
It's a great question, and it happens more often than you think. But this is the exact opposite of the Bhagavad Gita's teachings, okay? And we're not saying, if you need to make a family dinner and somebody falls on the street and you need to call 911, don't do it. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the habit of just pleasing others, doing for others at the expense of your family. That's what we're talking about.
That's right.
So, how do you stop yourself from this habitual people pleasing? Why does one people please? The truth is that people pleasing comes from the ego and the need for constant external praise. Sorry to say it, we all know at this point it is not our duty to just keep serving others at the expense of our family. On a visceral level, we all know that.
Right.
But people pleasing really comes from the ego and the need for constant external praise. I hate to say it, listener, but the validation comes from, oh, thank you for doing this. You're so great. You did that. Because if you really focused on your duty, you would understand that your duty is to spend time with your family. Not all your time, of course, everything is with balance. But if you know you're taking away from your family, it's time to look in the mirror and honestly answer the question, why am I doing this? And usually you're doing it because you're addicted to the external praise. Sorry, that's my Simon Cowell sort of hard
Hard truth.
hitting,
Hard truth.
hard truth. People pleasing also comes from having what they call a God complex, thinking that other people cannot do without you, which also comes from the ego. They can do without you. They'd probably do a better job without you because they'd be doing their own karma and their own duty. But you're enabling them to not do their duty. And unfortunately, you're also neglecting doing your own duty to your family. It's a lose lose situation, according to the Gita.
Listen, we all have competing priorities, right? We all have competing duties. Like at certain ages, you have a duty to maybe caring for your parents, and you have a duty to caring for your child, right? What do they call us? A sandwich generation, people of like our age, because we're caring for two different groups, both of whom are important. But how do you figure out how to care for those people? How do you balance that? How do you care for one group, like your parents, but not neglect your children, and then vice versa?
I
I
think
think it's tough.
yeah, I know it's tough. That is true. Competing priorities are tough, but I think this question, this person is saying, I feel it is my duty to do what other people ask of me. And this takes away from my family to please others. So I think what they're talking about is not necessarily competing priorities within family, even extended family. I think this is talking about people pleasing. To me, it says, how do I get over my people pleasing? That's what the question says to me. This person even says, I take time away from my family to please others. So the ideal thing to think is, what is my responsibility here? Is my responsibility to be with my family? Or is it to people please and get that temporary validation and external praise? Because that's what people pleasing is, right? You're pleasing them and they think, what a great person you are. You're so great. But yeah, because I've people pleased you. I've
But at
people
what
pleased.
cost?
Exactly. And at what cost? Lord Krishna says in chapter 18, verse 47, better one's own duty, though you may not get any merit for it, you may not get any praise for it, than the duty of another, and you get lots of praise for it. He says, by doing one's own duty according to one's own nature, one's own capabilities, you don't incur sin. And he uses the word sin very, very rarely in the Gita. The whole Gita is about focusing on your own duty, doing your own duty. And that's not to say you can't help out others if they're
That's right.
truly in need.
As
If
you
they're
should. That is part of your duty. But
like absolutely
yeah,
100%. But if you're just doing it for praise and to people please, then you've got to cut that out, because the negative karma you're incurring by neglecting your own duty to your family, by not spending enough time with them, and you're enabling the other person to neglect their own duty by enabling them not to do the tasks that are given to them, that are assigned to them to fulfill and create their own karma. So that's a lot of negative karma right there. And in chapter 3, verse 17, Lord Krishna says, validation can never come from external sources. That leads to a lot of external dependence. It leads to a lot of anxiety. It leads to a lot of fear. Validation must come from within you. He advises us in chapter 3, verse 17, to take delight in ourself, be satisfied in ourself, and be content in ourself. Trigger your own validation. Pat your own self on the back. Don't be looking for other people to do that for you, because if you care about what other people think, you'll always be their prisoner.
yes, because that goalpost is always changing. People's expectations of you are always changing. And sometimes the more you give, the more they expect, like it keeps expanding and expanding. And if you keep trying to please those other people, to your point exactly, you'll never please yourself. And you're always playing catch up. Like, what's the new way that I need to please them? What is more that I need to do to make them happy? It's just like a constantly changing goal. But ultimately, if you can understand yourself better and understand what you need and what your responsibility is and what your duty is, and only be true to yourself in that, then not only will you be doing your duty, but you'll be giving people the opportunity, as you said, for them to do their own dharma, and not building what's ultimately going to be a sense of resentment in this relationship. That's harmful.
Yeah, by neglecting your family, definitely causing resentment
Yes,
there.
absolutely.
And when you say yes to others, make sure you're not saying no to yourself or to performing what truly are your duties. Be very careful about that.
Oh, I like
Lo-
that way of thinking about it. When you say yes to others, make sure it's not saying no to yourself. That's a really good way of thinking about it.
Lastly, listener, I suggest you think also of the example you're setting for your children. Do you want them to repeat this same pattern and be in a prison of people pleasing? In chapter 3, verse 21, Lord Krishna says, whatever you do, you are setting an example for others to follow. And when we set an example, no one's watching us more closely than our children. Be careful.
It's true, and that's part of your dharma, right? And part of
Right.
your duty is to raise good citizens of the world.
And model behavior
Victims
that,
and model behavior is a critical
yeah,
part of that.
yeah,
Do
yeah,
as I say and as I do. Most importantly, as I do.
absolutely. All right. Next question.
Our last question for this episode is I have a college age child and have a tough time changing my parenting to respect my child's new boundaries in college.
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's a
It is very
really tough
tough.
one. I mean, for 18 years, we've been revolving our whole life around this child.
That's right. And I have one child in college, and Shamila's both kids have graduated from college. So we really understand this particular question.
Change is tough, especially, as you said, Shayla, if it's been deeply rooted and you've had the same patterns for a long time. And it's tough, especially when you have to let go of a child that has been so much a part of your life. But the truth is, in chapter 2, verse 13 and 14, Lord Krishna says, everything changes. Every situation changes, every person changes, every thought process changes, and we must adjust accordingly and see things as they are in order to optimally perform our duties. So if you don't change, your child and you will both suffer the consequences. It's hard, but pulling back at this point is part of your dharma. It is your duty to do that and respect your child's boundaries.
Listen, we saved this question for last because, for all of these other questions, we've been talking about people respecting your boundaries and
Mm,
you renegotiating your boundaries. But this
right.
one is about how do you respect others' new changing and shifting boundaries. And of course, we've used this very personal example of your child, where it's probably the most difficult to respect their shifting boundaries because you've had an expectation of your role and their role for so long. But I think, in the same way, we have said this entire time that the other person needs to hear you when you renegotiate or change your boundary or communicate your new boundary, and they have to respect that, and you have to be firm in that. Now the shoe is on the other foot.
Yeah.
And you have to give your child that same respect, and maybe you have to introduce the conversation. Maybe you have to be the one to say, okay, you're in college now, or you're an adult now, you're in this new phase of your life, and I need to know what you need from me. And you have to respect that, even as difficult as that may be. This is your time to treat their boundary in the same way you want others to treat your boundaries when you are renegotiating.
I love that you said that, Shayla. And there's 2 points I'd like to make here. As we said in our last episode, according to the book called Boundaries by Henry Cloud and John Townsend, you learn how to give a no and take a no from your mother. According to the Boundaries book, they said you should do it by the age of 3. The mother should have already taught the child how to give a no and take a no. But it's never too late. And by respecting your child's boundaries, you're really modeling great behavior for them to respect the boundaries of other people. That's not to say if their boundary is like, leave me alone and I'm going to fail every class and I'm going to rack up your credit card and there's nothing you can do about it because I'm in college. No, 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 no. Of course, as a parent, you have your boundaries, they have theirs. And it's important for both of you to be mutually respectful of each other's boundaries. But the whole Bhagavad Gita is an open and honest communication between Arjun and Lord Krishna. That's the entire Gita, is a conversation where they are communicating honestly with each other to exchange knowledge and come to truth and clarity and understanding. So the whole Gita is an advertisement for open and honest communication. Boundaries are also about honesty, communication, and the accurate expression of exactly how both of you are feeling. So if your child knows your position, you know your child's position, again, expressed with clarity and calm, then you both have an understanding of what each other is going through and can have compassion for this process you're both going through together, where your child is establishing these boundaries, you're having a hard time with it, you're trying to respect them. It goes hand in hand. So, really communicate to your child that, listen, I know this is your boundary. I know you're on your own. I know you're 18, but my parenting is in DEFCON 1 mode. I'm freaking out a little bit. And for example, I know you don't want to talk to me every day. I get it. But can you give me a thumbs up emoji or say something like, I'm alive?
Yes,
You know?
please. A little proof of life once in a while would be great.
Right. So everything is about compromise. And this is a great opportunity for you to model respecting boundaries and have your child emulate that behavior, which will help them in their life moving forward.
Absolutely. And honestly, I think it could, in the long term, deepen your relationship with your child. Like you've taken a different turn, gone down a different path in your relationship with each other and your role with your child. But that doesn't mean that your role is diminished. It just means that it's changed.
Yep, that's a great point, Shayla. Our roles as parents are not diminished, they're just changed. Change is the law of life according to the Gita, and you have to accept and embrace that change. And respecting their boundaries is respecting them,
That's right.
and you're teaching them how to also respect you. I have two kids who have long graduated college. Trust me, now I'm the one with boundaries. Like, no, I don't want to do this. Leave me alone. No.
I'm
No, no,
finished
no.
parenting you.
Yeah, exactly. I'm done with this.
You're
Why are you
grown.
asking me? Go ask your girlfriend. I'm just like, no, leave me alone.
See, renegotiating the boundaries. It's a constant course of action. You have to keep doing it.
Why are you asking me? There's somebody else could reply. You could ask.
Listen to the podcast. That's where I dole out my advice.
Is that part of your parenting now?
It's about to be.
Sending them the link. This is my advice.
Exactly.
Episode 13. Hi. Okay, so that is it. That's it for today. Our next episode, I'm very, very excited. It's going to be about boundaries with yourself, which is one of the most important boundaries you can have, and creating a much more respectful and beneficial relationship with yourself.
We are looking forward to that. And as always, we encourage you to communicate with us. You can email us at sharmila@geethagirl.com. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram. DM us your questions or your comments on either of those. That's Geeta Girl Podcast at both Facebook and Instagram. We encourage you to please like this podcast, rate us, follow us. All those numbers matter. So please do that if you can. Of course, only if you have a really positive rating.
Yeah. If you have a negative rating, just, I don't know.
Just send us an email.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll talk to you about it. Thank you all for listening to this podcast, and we look forward to the next one. Until then, be well.
Jai Shri Krishna, everyone.
Jai Shri Krishna.
Vasudevasutam devam Kansujanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vandev Jagadguram